Dr. Singer is a psychiatrist and Jungian psychoanalyst who lives and practices in the Bay Area. He actually lives in Mill Valley. He earned his undergraduate degree from Princeton University and received his MD from Yale University. He completed his psychiatric residency at Dartmouth Medical School. And if you know me, my husband is a huge Dartmouth person. And he then, did you train as a Jungian analyst after Dartmouth? That's what I thought. He is the author and editor of numerous influential books exploring the intersection of psychology and culture. Today, he will speak about his most recent work, A Field Guide to American Cultural Complexes, the Battleground of the Splintered American Psyche. Maybe he can talk about our president. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. We're not political in this organization. In it, he offers a compelling look at the cultural forces that shape and sometimes divide our collective and individual lives, drawing on powerful stories and striking imagery. Dr. Singer has served as the president of the Board of National ARAS, the Archives for Research into Archetypal, say Susie, say that, psychological, and is the series editor of the Analytical Psychology and Contemporary Culture series for Spring publication. His work thoughtfully bridges analytical psychology and contemporary society. We are pleased to welcome him as a fellow Mill Valley resident. His wife, you may know her, she is Jane Singer, and she serves as on our board as grounds director. Please help me in welcoming, wow, clap for Jane. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Tom Singer, and yes, you can clap for him too.
Thank you very much.
Maybe you can explain the difference between Jungian and Freudian.
That's another day.
Another day? Okay.
Can you hear me okay? No.
Oh,
how does this?
Thank you. Just put it close to your mouth.
It's right next. Oh, right next to your mouth. Okay. I'm just getting over the flu, so I'm a bit congested, but bear with me. It's a terrific honor and a special pleasure to be with you today because my wife Jane has played such a pivotal role in the life of our gardening and Mill Valley community, and particularly in the Outdoor Art Club, where she's done lots of garden design and maintenance. And so I'm very proud of Jane, in addition to which 2 of our daughters got married at the Outdoor Art Club. So it really feels like coming home. It's a special privilege for me to be with you today. Let's see, let me pull up my talk here. If I can get my finger on the right button. There it is. In today's world, we're incredibly lucky to have such a stunning organization and, I guess, building in process in the very heart of our town, especially in a time when solid structures upon which we can rely and find stability, dignity, and community are increasingly rare, precious, and important. So that makes my coming here even more meaningful to me, because this is such a integral part of the Mill Valley and Marin community. I find it useful to think of our collective psychic emotional environment as being like a sea in which we swim, or like the very air we breathe. We don't normally think of psyche as surrounding us like the air we breathe or the water we swim in, but it is how I have imagined our psychic environment for some time. For the past 2.5 decades, close to 25 years, I have been studying what I call cultural complexes, during which time I have put together 7 volumes of books on cultural complexes as they occur around the world. My study of these ubiquitous, naturally occurring phenomena would not have happened at all without the arrival of the internet at the turn of the 21st century, which permitted a kind of instantaneous global communication, which allowed me to communicate with over 100 colleagues around the world with whom I worked on this concept over the past 2.5 decades. And this very capacity to communicate so easily is also responsible for our being flooded with forces and information that can so readily invade and overwhelm us. On my Thomas Singer, MD Substack, I have been developing an AI-generated digital library in which I channel dead authors as they might speak about our current times. Listen to what Anne Morrow Lindbergh, this isn't actually her, but it's an AI-generated video that I created, said in her beautiful book, Gift from the Sea, in 1955. If we simply substitute digital media for print media in her statement, it seems all the more true today, some 70 years later.
The search for outward simplicity, for inner integrity, for fuller relationship, is this not a limited outlook? Of course it is, in one sense. Today, a kind of planetary point of view has burst upon mankind. The world is rumbling and erupting in ever-widening circles around us. The tensions, conflicts, and sufferings, even in the outermost circle, touch us, reverberate in all of us. We cannot avoid these vibrations. But just how far can we implement this planetary awareness? We are asked today to feel compassionately for everyone in the world, to digest intellectually all the information spread out in public print, and to implement in action every ethical impulse aroused by our hearts and minds. The interrelatedness of the world links us constantly with more people than our hearts can hold. Or rather, for I believe the heart is infinite, modern communication loads us with more problems than the human frame can carry. It is good, I think, for our hearts, our minds, our imaginations to be stretched. But body, nerve, endurance, and lifespan are not as elastic. My life cannot implement in action the demands of all the people to whom my heart responds. I cannot marry all of them, or bear them all as children, or care for them all as I would my parents in illness or old age. Our grandmothers, and even, with some scrambling, our mothers, lived in a circle small enough to let them implement in action most of the impulses of their hearts and minds. We were brought up in a tradition that has now become impossible, for we have extended our circle throughout space and time.
It's pretty timely, isn't it? And that was 70 years ago that she wrote that. And in the opening remarks by our president today, describing the early Outdoor Art Club events, I was reminded of Anne Morrow Lindbergh's words, because it sounds like Mill Valley and the Outdoor Art Club of that time was a circle in which people could all come together and tend to all the people that they cared about. They were close enough at home, and the needs that people had weren't necessarily, they weren't bombarded by all the rest of the world and its needs and its claims on us. The subject of my talk today is the topic of my new book called A Field Guide to American Cultural Complexes. Let's see, I guess I do this one myself, don't I, Garrett?
Search for outward simplicity, for inner integrity.
There, okay. So this is the cover of my new book. It's called A Field Guide to American Cultural Complexes, the Battleground of the Splintered American Psyche. And you can see it's a rather unusual book cover. And it sort of suits my sense of humor and my sense of play. I don't think we can approach topics like this if we don't have a sense of creative play, because they very quickly overwhelm us. The strange bird on the book's cover is a hybrid beast that symbolizes the psychic reality of America today. It wears a MAGA hat while displaying the rainbow flag feathers of the Gay Pride movement. In other words, it is filled with contradictions and paradoxes that span a broad spectrum of forces that compete for our attention and loyalty. This symbolic bird of America's collective psyche straddles a parched and divided landscape. This is the battleground of the splintered American psyche. And today we are all a bit like the boy on the book covers whose face is buried in a guidebook, who is trying to understand what is happening to a world in the midst of such profound turmoil. We don't know if this turmoil is leading to transformation or destruction or both, but it is certainly not remaining unchanged. I want to present a way of thinking about these forces that allow us to look at them as if we are naturalists, observing plants or birds or animals, even as these creatures I am describing live inside us as well as all around us. By approaching them as a naturalist might, it gives us a chance to become more psychologically objective about forces that can take hold of us, such that our everyday waking egos as individuals and as groups can easily fall into possession by powerful emotions, thoughts, and memories that have observable characteristics. That is why I call my book a field guide. And the way in which these cultural complexes inhabit our inner and outer worlds is why I chose a quote from Salman Rushdie's book, Midnight's Children, as the epigraph. Rushdie writes, "Telepathy, then, the inner monologues of all the so-called teeming millions of masses and classes alike jostled for space in my head." The next image, do you mind doing that, Garrett? So I think that in this book, I actually created over 100 images using AI because I find that images is a particularly effective way of evoking something of the symbolic and emotional life that these forces generate in us. And I think all of us can identify a little bit with this guy here whose his head is parched and he's clearly suffering enormously as he's listening to all of the clamoring voices that are not just outside calling for his attention and loyalty, but actually reverberate inside. And all of us have these forces that are moving inside of us, clamoring for our attention, for our loyalty, and they, of course, are profoundly disruptive. So this fractured within, fractured without is the inner battleground of American cultural complexes. And this image powerfully evokes how cultural complexes are not merely external forces, they take up residence within our psyches, shaping emotion, perception, and identity. The man at the center clenches his face in anguish as a cracked desert spreads across his scalp, suggesting a mind splintered by collective trauma and political polarization. Around him, impassioned figures from opposing ideological factions rage with fists raised, left and right, progressive and conservative, technocrat and populist, each embodying a cultural complex demanding allegiance, moral certainty, and emotional investment. I have come to believe that what I call cultural complexes is one way to gain some perspective on the forces that are dividing us. It is my thesis that these complexes compete for our loyalty and act almost as virus-like structures that infect our identities, our politics, and our culture. They are naturally occurring phenomena and often provide the very foundations of healthy group and individual identity. But they can just as easily take the shape of profoundly divisive forces that can destroy the very fabric of our society. These cultural complexes make up a very different melting pot, this is the next one, Garrett, than what we normally think of as the American melting pot. And they don't melt. These are cultural complexes that are all being thrown into the melting pots of our psyche. And as you can see, none of them really go together, or maybe they align with, a couple align with one another and conflict with others. So you have the gay pride flag, and you have the peace symbol, and you have the Christian cross, and you have MAGA, and you have the Constitution, and you have the Confederate flag, and you have the justice system, presumably. And all of these are rivalrous kinds of institutional forces that are supposed to come together in a democratic society, but right now they're clearly not, they're not working together. We all know that. There's no mystery about that. Many Americans today feel overwhelmed and overburdened by the relentless flood of conflicting narratives surging through society. Every headline, opinion page, or dinner table discussion seems to throb with urgency, distortion, and division. The more implausible the story, the more powerfully it grips the psyche. We are living in a crazy-making environment, and that's just absolutely true. We are living in a crazy-making environment. Here is an unsettling truth. Much of what we are reacting to isn't coming from real people at all. It comes instead from cultural complexes, which are impersonal forces made up of raw emotion, inherited trauma, and mythic stories. These complexes often masquerade as individuals, with people acting like puppet-like mouthpieces of their narratives. Cultural complexes are composed of powerful emotions, selective memories, symbolic images, simplistic thoughts, and stereotypical behavior. They function like splinter personalities of the American psyche, subpersonalities that walk and talk as if human, but in reality are psychic fragments possessing individuals and groups like mutating viruses. One of the greatest challenges we face is how to remain a real person, how not to be absorbed into a cultural complex as our primary identity. These complexes are autonomous. They act on their own. They don't ask for conscious permission to take hold of us. They possess, they trigger, they distort, and most destructively, they do not dialogue. They do not compromise. They clash like mythic titans in the group and individual psyche, vying for the soul of the individual and the soul of the nation. They are everywhere in our institutions, in our media, in our homes, and inside us. Complexes do not listen. They dominate and they clash again and again as archetypal forces locked in a mythic struggle for national identity. These complexes are not merely ideological. They are emotional organisms rooted in trauma, myth, and history. They animate our politics, our media, our social groups, and our sense of self. They are the building blocks of what I think of as an inner sociology, one not based on statistics, but on images, emotions, and unconscious identifications. They behave like autonomous personalities within both individual and group psyches. They are activated by emotionally charged trigger words such as weaponization, woke, MAGA, socialist, evoking reactive responses that are much more like automatic reflexes than the product of conscious reflection. We call them autonomous because they operate independently of conscious will. Like the vegetative nervous system that governs heartbeat, respiration, and digestion, cultural complexes regulate our emotional metabolism below the level of awareness. They divide us not only from each other, but also internally, as we can feel torn by the opposing poles of a single complex. What tears America apart isn't mere disagreement, but the inability of cultural complexes to communicate with one another. When we're gripped by them, we speak in slogans, we react instead of reflect, and I call them cultural complexes because they possess specific, recognizable characteristics that define how they function within the psyche. And that's why I call this a field guide. It's like identifying birds by their feathers and their characteristics. Can I have the next image, please? Now, this is a list of characteristics of cultural complexes. If you were a scientist, a sociologist, and you wanted to know what I was talking about, you'd want to know all the different characteristics that define a cultural complex. And this is a list. I don't think I'll go through all of it, but I'll be saying enough about it that what's on this list will come to mind. But I've tried to work both as a psychiatrist and as just a citizen, a psychiatrist, a citizen, and something of a scientist, in the sense of defining a phenomena that has common characteristics so that when you move from one cultural complex to another, the same characteristics hold, and you can look at them in that context. It's a way of categorizing and understanding. Today, we are not merely facing political disagreements or cultural wars. We are facing a tectonic collision of cultural complexes, splintered subpersonalities of the American psyche that distort how we see ourselves and one another. I now want to give you a number of examples of what I mean by cultural complexes, And I will mostly use symbolic images to communicate what I mean by a cultural complex. This is in the tradition of ARAS, where I've worked since 1991. It's the Archives for Research into Archetypal Symbolism, which is a real mouthful. Some of you, though, may know the book that we published called The Book of Symbols, which is a book of 400 or 500 symbols that we published with Taschen 10 or 12 years ago. It's an unbelievably beautiful and interesting book that looks at all of archetypal symbolism and archetypal symbols from around the world. And unbelievably, Taschen was able to publish this, I think, for $38 or some unbelievably small price, particularly given the number of images. And it's been their #1 bestseller for 10 years or more. It's a great book to have. And I refer to it because when I talk about the psyche and that water that we swim in or the air that we breathe, its natural way of expressing itself is in images. And to bring the concept of cultural complexes alive, I want to speak to you in terms of image. The first image, the first complex I'm going to discuss, I'm going to give in more detail than the others, but this is the mega cultural complex. And I think you'll all recognize it as a cultural complex. You all may have strong reactions one way or the other. I'm not here to politicize or polemicize. I have very strong feelings about these things, but that's not the purpose of my presentation today. Can we have the next? This is actually the reason I really got going on this book is I wanted to explore artificial intelligence, AI, and I thought the best way to explore it is to look into something that I know something about. And since I've spent 25 years studying this idea and probably know as much, if not more than anybody about it, I thought I would ask AI what it knew about cultural complexes. And it created that list of characteristics that I showed you earlier, which in 40 seconds was better than anything I had been able to produce in 25 years. I mean, it was really good. So then I got going and I said, well, what's the mega cultural complex like? And AI did something really surprising there too, because instead of just confirming my own very strong feelings and biases, it did something different. It actually made me think about the mega cultural complex as a cultural complex and not simply something that I had strong negative feelings about. So AI created this image, symbolic image of the mega cultural complex. And it's called the vortex of glory, the mega cultural complex as mythic force. This image captures the archetypal intensity of the mega cultural complex, not merely a political movement, but a cosmic swirl of emotion, myth, and national identity. At its core is not policy, but a longing to return, redeem, and restore. The American eagle rises above a radiant spiral of red, white, and blue, a storm of symbolism that suggests both rebirth and peril. The mega cultural complex is a forceful and emotionally charged psychic structure built around themes of loss, betrayal, and defiant restoration. It binds together myth, memory, imagery, and behavior into a powerful cultural and political identity. And I wanted to give you an idea sort of how I use the working definition of cultural complex in this one specific example. So maybe the primary characteristic of a cultural complex is that it has a core, powerful emotion. And in the case of mega, the core emotion is righteous anger, betrayal, and triumphal defiance. At its emotional core is a volatile blend of indignation and longing, a sense that something sacred has been stolen. This includes lost jobs, cultural identity, national pride, sovereign control, and a moral clarity that once felt self-evident. The anger is not only reactive, but also redemptive. It declares, we were wronged and we will rise again. The mythic root, each cultural complex has a mythic root as well as a core emotion. The mythic root is akin to something like the lost golden age and the chosen people. The MAGA narrative draws on deep mythic currents, a yearning to return to a greater past imagined as more pure, prosperous, and morally ordered. This longing mirrors archetypes like Eden after the fall, or Israel reclaiming the promised land. In this mythology, real Americans are the chosen people, tasked with rescuing the nation from corrupt elites and dangerous outsiders who have led it astray. The symbolic imagery, another aspect of or characteristic of cultural complexes, is that it takes the form of symbolic imagery. And the visual language of MAGA is potent and evocative. Red hats function as tribal totems, signs of belonging and resistance. A partially built wall stands as a monument to protection and exclusion. An eagle clutching broken chains represents liberation through strength. A weathered American flag flaps defiantly in a storm, refusing to fall. A charismatic strongman stands on a crumbling foundation, promising restoration. Crowds raise fists or weep with conviction, blending anger and faith. A map of America glows from within, besieged by encroaching darkness. Now you'll see in this description, at least here, I'm not taking a position. I'm simply describing, I would think if you were a MAGA person, you might say yes, yes, yes to everything I've said. That it accurately describes the inner experience of being a MAGA person. Another characteristic, a very important one, is what we think of, or what I call self-reinforcing memory. You also know this through the term echo chamber. We all are living in our echo chambers, and we hear our own news and information according to our particular interests or concerns or beliefs. Well, cultural complexes also have self-reinforcing memory that they call upon. And in the case of MAGA, this self-reinforcing memory is a story of betrayal and decline. It recounts how globalism, liberalism, immigration, mainstream media, and coastal elites have conspired, intentionally or negligently, to undermine the American way of life. This narrative is often historically distorted, but its emotional resonance is profound. Every grievance becomes proof of the complex's truth. Every perceived injustice adds fuel to its fire. Another characteristic of the MAGA cultural complex is black and white thinking, and of all cultural complexes, black and white thinking. It thrives on stark dualities. There are patriots and traitors, winners and losers, real Americans and infiltrators. Such binary logic energizes loyalty but erodes nuance. Opposition is not just disagreement, it's framed as an existential threat. Complexity is dismissed, dissent is demonized, and extreme measures are justified in the name of survival. Repetitive behavior. The MAGA complex expresses itself through highly ritualized behaviors. Rallying cries, flags, memes, and chants form a culture of performative loyalty. Public declarations of allegiance act as social litmus tests. Enemies, whether media, bureaucrats, scientists, or academics, are vilified. There are repeated calls for purification, drain the swamp, take back our country. Institutions that challenge the myth of MAGA, especially those tied to reason, pluralism, or global cooperation, are met with deep suspicion or outright contempt. So, I think I'll stop there with the MAGA cultural complex. I think that's enough. I'm just going to show you one other image from the MAGA cultural complex because I think it's really, really powerful. Let's see, where am I here? Yeah. This is, can you do the next one, Garrett, please? The Anointed One, the MAGA cultural complex, and the apotheosis of leadership. And all of us recognize that Trump has a messianic charisma, whether we fall into it or are violently opposed to it. He has tremendous charisma, and it is the charisma of a messianic leader. And archetypally, that's very powerful in the human psyche. When you get those kind of archetypal possessions of an individual who identifies with the nation, and then people in the nation identify with him, it's got a religious quality to it. It has a messianic calling to it. The closest thing that comes to mind, of course, is Hitler during at the beginning of during the Second World War. So I'm going to move on now. That's enough on the megacultural complex. Here's another cultural complex. This is the white Christian nationalism cultural complex. The anointed nation, the white Christian nationalism cultural complex. This image depicts the white Christian nationalism cultural complex as a sacred fusion of faith, family, nation, and political identity. A nuclear family kneels in prayer before a pulpit draped in the American flag, lit by the divine radiance of a towering cross. Behind them, shadowy masses raise crosses of their own, while national institutions and symbols, church, capital, eagle, converge under a single glowing narrative of chosen identity. The next one, please. The progressive cultural complex. It's actually harder to think of the group that you identify with as being a cultural complex. It's easier to think of the group you don't identify with as being possessed by a cultural complex. So this image of the progressive cultural complex is Toward the Dawn, the American progressive cultural complex and the promise of renewal. This image visualizes the American progressive cultural complex as a collective striving towards justice, peace, and ecological balance. Led by a diverse group of youth bearing symbols of harmony, equality, and resilience, the movement rises beneath a radiant phoenix and rainbow, emblems of rebirth and inclusive hope. Here, activism becomes sacred pilgrimage, and the horizon glows with the possibility of transformation. The progressive cultural complex is a vibrant and often impassioned psychic structure built around moral vision, social transformation, and restorative justice. It channels historical grievance into future possibility, combining grief and hope into a continuous striving to a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. I'm waiting for these youth to show up. The next one, please. The elitism cultural complex. And sometimes I think probably I'm closer to this one than any. I went to Princeton and Yale and Dartmouth and became a psychoanalyst and live on Summit Avenue in Mill Valley. And I have a lot of progressive views and attitudes about which I speak strongly. But I can see very easily how, by somebody from the Midwest where I grew up, would view me as being possessed by an elitist cultural complex. And many people from Marin are viewed as being possessed by the elitist cultural complex. The pageantry of power in the elitism cultural complex. On a grand balcony above a gathered crowd, elegantly dressed figures drink wine and observe from above, their expressions ranging from solemn to contemplative. One man delivers a speech, script in hand, while a masked woman embodies the mystique and exclusivity of the elite. The setting sun casts a golden glow over domed institutions in the distance, underscoring themes of legacy, hierarchy, and performance. This image captures the elitism cultural complex's dramatization of authority, where social standing and aesthetic refinement mask power and control. The elitism cultural complex is characterized by a powerful blend of pride, refinement, and intellectual superiority, often accompanied by anxiety over its relevance in a rapidly changing world. It reflects a belief in elevated status earned through intellect, taste, education, or access, but often cloaks a deeper fear of losing control, being misunderstood, or becoming obsolete in the eyes of the broader public. The next one, please. We're really in the grips of this one right now, the Fortress America cultural complex. Behind the wall, the Fortress America cultural complex. An armed sentinel stands guard beneath barbed wire and watchtowers flanked by a caged eagle and a flag that no longer waves freely. A mother and children huddle behind a curtain while shadows loom outside and smoke darkens the sky. This image captures the Fortress America cultural complex, rooted in fear, isolation, and the longing to preserve through exclusion. It reflects a vision of safety secured not by trust or community, but by vigilance, separation, and the illusion of control. And everything we've been witnessing in Minneapolis over the last several weeks is really about the Fortress America cultural complex and how far we're going to go in that direction. It's really unclear. The next one, please. And I'm just running through these to give you a sense of how these forces that you're all familiar with, if you think of them as cultural complexes, take on a different life in terms of how they live in the psyche. This is the anti-Black cultural complex. And this image captures the enduring psychic burden of the anti-Black cultural complex. A Black man stands at the center, bound in iron chains, his gaze unflinching. Behind him, a spectral figure of an enslaved ancestor and a modern police cruiser bracket him in history, linking past captivity with present control. The man's expression reflects neither resignation nor rage, but a deep and weary knowledge that freedom is still contested ground. This idea of the self-reinforcing memory, if you're part of a tribe that's been discriminated against, your primary memory in terms of a cultural complex is going to be about colonization or imprisonment or trauma. That's going to be the defining element of how you identify. And some people take that on as their exclusive identity, and that's all you get when you talk to them. You can't find the person because they're so identified with the complex. The anti-Asian cultural complex. This is one that I think in the Bay Area and around the country, I have some patients that are Asian, so I've become much more aware of how powerful it is to be an Asian and feel the impact of the anti-Asian cultural complex. At the center of a storm of caricature, silence, and fear, an Asian American girl stands with quiet strength. Around her swirl grotesque stereotypes: yellow peril, disease, closed, echoes of slurs, scapegoating, and erasure. Behind her, a grieving mother shields a child beside images of internment, protest, and paper cranes, symbols of both past trauma and fragile hope. The image reveals the anti-Asian cultural complex as a struggle between invisibility and dignity, survival and resistance, memory and transformation. The next one, please. The American dream cultural complex. We all know this one. We all grew up in this one in one way or another. And this one is that we all are capable of making the golden ascent, dreams built from labor and longing. This image presents a haunting yet tender portrait of the American dream cultural complex. A man grips a hammer beside a folded, worn flag. A woman reads, quietly rooted. Behind them, a glowing stairway leads toward a shining, unreachable city in the clouds, an archetype of hope, success, and transcendence. The dream ascends, but those who built it remain in shadow, grounded in toil and memory. The American belief in progress cultural complex. I think I'll move through them a little more quickly, but this is also one that we all, it's in our bones. It's in our bones and it's in our blood and it's in the air we breathe, it's in the water we swim in, which is the belief that progress is eternal, that things will always get better, that technology will improve our lives, that we will have homes and education for our kids and new technology and new scientific conquests and DNA and AI. It's the belief that progress is an almost linear ascension and that it's inevitable. Of course, it is not inevitable, but the belief in the cultural complex makes it seem inevitable. Here's one we're all familiar with. Maybe I don't even need to say anything about this one. You want to do the next one? This is, oh, no, not that one. Back. This is the American consumerism cultural complex. We all know this one. We all live in this one. This is our myth. We live to consume. You remember when George Bush, after the bombing, where was the bombing? The Twin Tower bombing. You know what everybody remembers. Maybe you remember what he said. He said, go shop. That was what our president said to us. Go shop. If we consume, we're going to get better and our lives will get better. But we get consumed by our consumerism, and I think we all feel this as a very powerful cultural complex. And I can tell you in our household, we sometimes try and resist it, rather unsuccessfully, I would say. The American exceptionalism cultural complex. The next one, please. There has been, this also is in our blood, which is that as Americans, the American story, the American myth, the American history is absolutely exceptional. There's never been anything like it in history, and there never will be. This is a very powerful myth. It's a very powerful cultural complex, and of course, right now it's fractured. It's deeply fractured. And our sense of our exceptionalism is being challenged at home and abroad in ways that none of us in our lifetime quite experienced. China's looming on the horizon as clearly the next most powerful nation. And our relationship to Europe is in shatters. And our sense of ourselves as leaders of the world is in such rapid declining. So the American exceptionalism cultural complex is under tremendous assault. Next one. And any of you who have kids and grandkids recognize this, which is the social media cultural complex. And we're all, again, totally in the thralls of it. Everybody here, I suspect, has a cell phone. And within 10 minutes of leaving this room, I suspect you will look at your cell phone and figure out what you're going to do next. And of course, the fear is, what is it going to do to the next generation? What are our kids going to be like who are addicted to this social media? I was addicted to this during writing this book. I was up from 2 till 6 every morning. I was so addicted to artificial intelligence, cranking out these images and this whole thing, which is really like a lifetime's work coming together. And I couldn't stop until I started to get seizures, because I had a sleep disorder. And so the addiction to media and computers and so on is a very serious intellectual and emotional and physical threat, and we don't know the implications of it yet. The next one. The disinformation cultural complex. And again, we're all subject to it. The very notion of truth is under assault. We don't know what to believe or who to believe and who's spinning a story and what news to, what particular silo to place ourselves in terms of the news we get. That's a cultural complex. I think I'll just do one others. Let's skip this next one, Garrett, and I want to do something because I think this is really important. Can you go? Yeah, keep going. Keep going. What?
Each image is a complex.
Each image is a complex. That's right. Each image.
Only know about the ones you skip if we buy the book.
Well, that was that. Yes. Thank you. That was not my intention. My intention was to give you a lot, and I'm afraid I'm giving you too much. But maybe I'm also enticing you to go buy, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? I want to do this last one because I want time for some questions maybe. And so I want you to keep going. I timed this, and of course, it all went much quicker when I was by myself doing it. The kleptocracy cultural complex. I love this one. This is the American narcissism cultural complex. The American eagle is taking a selfie. And There we are. That's who we are. That's our story. I wanted to do something on men and women because I think it's so appropriate for this institution. Okay, go down, please. Yeah, okay. This is the American male cultural complex. This isn't the old cultural complex in which many men were brought up in a culture in which it was really important not to show your feeling and to be stoic and to be sort of holding your own and kind of a kind of individual who held his own. And this was true in family life and in cultural life. And so the repression or the exclusion of feeling was such a strong part of the American cultural complex. And what's really happened in the last 20 years or so, which is where a cultural complex has actually progressed, where something has changed over time in the next image. And I think it's true. I think if I took a poll here, can you show the next image? That there's a different feeling that's emerging among men in relation to feeling, in relation to one another, in relation to women, in which there's a more positive acceptance of themselves as vulnerable, sentient, feeling human beings. And the culture has shifted. And it only happens because not a single individual, but the whole culture shifts. And that's very important when you're talking about cultural complexes. If you want to see change, it doesn't just happen in the individual, it happens in large groups. And I do think there's been a tremendous shift in the men's cultural complex. And then the next image is the women's movement cultural complex. And hopefully this will speak to you. Weaving the thread of she, the women's movement cultural complex. A luminous tableau evokes the collective force of the woman's movement cultural complex. At its center, a woman weaves threads marked memory, body, grief, and hope. Each strand spun from deeply embodied experiences. Multiple feminine figures surround her in layered transparency, suggesting ancestral memory and intergenerational presence. That was what was being evoked earlier in the earliest introduction today. Overhead, the moon cycles through its phases, symbolizing cyclical time, intuitive wisdom, and renewal. On one side, barren branches and silenced figures emerge from a past of repression. On the other, blooming forms and raised hands rise in solidarity. The tapestry becomes a living communitas, woven from shared struggle, sacred embodiment, and the enduring hope for a more just future. And then I think the last image, because maybe there'll be time for a few questions. And I think the Outdoor Art Club embodies this to some extent. It's called the Solemn Assembly, Keepers of Justice, Memory, and Voice. And in fact, the affirmation that was read really would be a statement of that solemn assembly of the keepers of justice, memory, and voice. A solemn assembly of women, diverse in age and origin, stand in quiet solidarity, bearing the symbols of justice, knowledge, and wisdom. Their calm strength evokes a legacy of truth-seeking and collective guardianship across generations. I think I'll stop there and see if there are some questions, maybe. It's such a mouthful, yes.
So the question that comes up for me, seeing all these images, is where does race fit into this? It's such a part of our American story and current life. And this final image, depicts a diversity. But so many of the other images are primarily white people, even the one that's about the American dream, which I think is such a something that we associate with immigrants, and so I just wonder how you factor that into your.
Yeah, I'd have to look back through and see because I was very conscious of race as a cultural complex, but maybe I isolated race as a cultural complex to the races. Yeah, I don't doubt that. I think bias is built into all of these things. I actually think the American dream, or they're Latino people, but it may not be so obvious. I'd have to go through. Maybe you'll get the book and go through and do an inventory for me of how biased it is towards white people. Thank you, though. It's a good question. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, how many in total?
How many cultural complexes? Somebody counted them. There's 70 or something. But the point is, I mean, they're not all. They're interrelated. They're interconnected.
Well, I can imagine a fantastic board game. not 70, but a family therapy board game with various places and depending on the card you draw and how it relates to the conversation.
That's a great idea. You want to work on it together? Yeah, we could call it Monopoly 2 or something.
No, it's more like a big Venn diagram.
The idea of this field guide is to lay all of this stuff out there so that you can see them as individual but interrelated things. You recognize every one of these things is familiar to you. Thinking of them as cultural complexes is not, probably. And how cultural complexes function is the new piece, because if we can be more objective about these things, they're less likely to possess us, both individually and collectively. These things operate so beneath the surface of things and so automatically that you win elections based on which of these complexes you play at any given time. Yes?
How did you find these wonderful illustrations?
Well, from 2 in the morning until 6 in the morning, I was on AI, and I was telling AI which cultural complex I wanted, and AI would come up with images, and I would choose some and reject a lot of them. But you see, people are really afraid of AI. That is a new cultural complex. The fact is, it offers tremendous potential if you can approach it with kind of discernment and play, because it has a huge amount of information that it can arrange in new forms. All of these images, I mean, I was stunned by the images that it produced. Yes?
More of a comment than a question, but this last one here really brought to mind an issue. I think it was San Francisco magazine that came out last year, and it was the top 100 people in AI in the Bay Area. And I went through and I counted, and it was 60 to 70% of the people were men. And then all of the women, every single woman that was highlighted here was a regulator or an enforcer or something in justice. So the men were the creators, and the women were the guardrails, the judges.
Really?
It was so interesting.
Yeah.
So personal. So this really absolutely happened.
Well, the affirmation that you read at the beginning about the task as an organization you have is about, I think, justice and care and consideration for other people. And right now, I think women are the ones carrying that. Nobody else seems to be. Yes?
I'm afraid we'll look at a broken record, but how much does the condition of climate change put pressure on these complexes, do you think?
Well, I think 1/6 of the energy we're using today is going globally is going to AI. It's staggering. So the relationship between technology and climate change is just hugely interconnected. And I think just today, Trump found another way of disengaging from our involvement with climate change. And we're just turning our back on climate change as if it doesn't exist. It's a massive denial. It's terrifying. And I do think that climate change climate change adds a kind of apocalyptic urgency to all of this. There's an image at the end, apocalyptic, of Elon Musk going to Mars. He's one very smart guy. He doesn't think we're going to make it. He thinks we need to go to another planet. So it's creating enormous pressure to literally leave the planet. One way to think about this field guide and these complexes is not to see them in isolation. Actually, the reason Anne Morrow Lindbergh's quote is so good is that the whole world is changing so rapidly, and all of these things cluster together so that they're so interconnected in terms of how they affect us. And the effect, I think, is a sense of urgency and direness that we all feel, and in the face of which many of us feel quite overwhelmed and rather helpless.
Yes.
That leads directly to my question, which is, hearing this is all very fascinating, is now what do we do about this? In other words, is just watching your presentation gave me a little bit of anxiety hearing about all of these complexes and recognizing them. You did earlier state, as long as we can be objective about it, so that makes a little bit of sense to me, but does your book provide some sort of answers to, like, now what, or how do we navigate this? Because, or should I come and see you?
Well, I'm not sure if I can be much help. I think that therapeutics is, in some ways, is always the first question. What do you do about this? I don't go to that question first because I'm in the school of Robert J. Lifton, who was among our most distinguished psychoanalysts, who wrote about Hiroshima, and he wrote about the concentration camps in Germany, and he was active up until just several months ago when he died at 99. And he talked about witnessing. He felt it was very important that we witness what's going on and we give expression to it. Now, witness can mean many things. It can mean you go out in the street and you march, or it can mean that you take political action, or it means you identify these things in yourself and with your neighbors and your friends. The important thing for me is to recognize these things and witness them, because I think it actually gives us the possibility of thinking and reflecting. And without that, when these complexes take hold, there is no thinking, there is no reflecting. And without thought and reflection, therapeutics are pretty meaningless. That's my own. So I don't offer therapeutics, but it's a great question.
I've been thinking about the images and what is missing from a lot of them, and wondering if maybe that is what connects us. Totally simplistic, but like dogs. Like there's no dogs, or maybe no children, or nature or whatnot. And I'm just curious if that is addressed at all, or what your thoughts are.
Well, we have 2 dachshunds, and we love our dogs, and dogs do make us human. These are about forces that actually make us inhuman. These are forces that take away our humanity, because we start to think in stereotypical terms with stereotypical thoughts and memories and feelings, and it's precisely that stereotypical thinking that deprives of us our humanity. So you're right, there is an absence. And the whole plea of the book is to be less identified unconsciously with these complexes, so there is more room for conscious dialogue with one another, including nature. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the thing. But it's a really keen observation. And the things that make us human are not the focus of this book. It's the things that make us inhuman. I talk about them as virus. That's the focus of this book. Although I do think the progression in the male cultural complex and the female cultural complex, there's been real transformation in that area, and I think that does make us more human. I think when we work on our cultural complexes, there's actually the possibility for more human relatedness. Yes?
I'm just thinking about the cultural complexes and wondering, this is focusing on America. If we took these same cultural complexes, would we find them or be able to identify them in other cultures, or is this American exceptionalism that we've got 70?
Well, my first 7 books, it sounds a little narcissistic, but my first 7 books were about cultural complexes around the world. And I was very curious what other people from other countries identify as their primary cultural complexes. And I can tell you that they would not identify most of these as their uniquely difficult cultural complexes. Some they would share issues around masculine and feminine, they would certainly share issues around consumerism, they would share issues around the environment, they would share issues around racism and so on. Many they would share, but in my experience, people from other cultures tend to identify other things. This is pretty uniquely American, I would say. And maybe it's another form of our exceptionalism. Yeah. But they're everywhere. When I say we swim in them, I really mean it. We swim in them. They're all around us, and they're inside of us, and we read about them, and we think in their thoughts. And this book is sort of a plea just to identify these things because they tend to, like the consumer, they just live us. They live us. We handed out, I don't know if you saw it, but the publisher provided some little bookmarks for me, and so they're on your tables if you just want a bookmark to remember today or a bookmark. There you are. Thanks very much.